to stream. Perfect. So can you guys hear me? Is the audio loud and clear? If you could really. Okay, yeah. Can you guys hear me? I think you did. I could hear myself over there. So, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, and welcome to the session on Boldface. We still have about 4 minutes before we start the session. So we would, I just, I thought you guys saw about 10 to 15 people over there. So I thought I'd engage with you guys. So if you, an hour or so later, when you're watching the recording, just fast forward the next 4 minutes because we would officially start the session in 4 minutes. So since you guys were there, I thought I'd actually get some inputs from you and inputs regarding, okay, which part of GMAT are you struggling most with? I have about 15 students, 16 students here right now. So let's get some data to understand, to get to know you guys a bit better. So what aspect of the test are you struggling with or other? Let's start with the easier question. What's your target GMAT score? If you can type that in the chat part over here on the side. Okay, let's get some comments here. The question is, what's your target GMAT score? And again, we still have about 3 minutes before we officially start. So yeah, okay, I get some 710, 650 plus. Anish says Vivek says 750. That's really good. And while that number is coming in, what are the areas that you're struggling most with? So if you could just say the top 2 or top 3 areas, that actually would be quite helpful. What are the top 2, top 3 areas that you're struggling most with? Let's get a few responses over there, and we are just 2 minutes before we get started. Okay, Ayam says SC. Anish says intense correction. The Cosmic says RC. Asim says problem solving and RC. And then Anish says quant. All right, that's some good data. And then how many of you, last question before we, I think, officially get started, how many of you love Boldface questions since we are just about to get started? Oh, what do you think about Boldface? I think let's just talk about that. So what do you think about Boldface questions? Vivek says, I have 45 days to the D-Day and quant seems too overwhelming at the moment. Any advice? Vivek, I think the first advice I can give you is create a plan. The second advice I can give you is to make sure that you define in that plan areas of focus and then, have metrics that you can really say that, hey, I'm actually improving on those areas. So if you have that, then I think you're going to find that quant won't be overwhelming. If you do not have a plan, if you've not divided into neat segments, and then as you divide them, you probably will have to make a choice. So one of the things that I would really say is, do permutations, combinations, probability towards the end. If you haven't mastered other pieces, don't bother doing them. Okay, with that, let's formally get started with the session. So welcome, guys. My name is Rajat Chadana. I am one of the co-founders of GMAT, and I'm going to be your host today. In this session, we're going to look at how do we tackle boldface questions, and more specifically, we're going to look at how to approach them. Let me just share my screen. This is the right screen. Perfect. How to approach boldface questions. What do we do in step 1, step 2, and step 3? And our focus is going to be on the method. Now, with regards to boldface questions, there's something which is very interesting about boldface questions. They marry so the first thing is They are boldface questions are deterministic, which means that when you get a boldface question, you're not required to think outside the argument. It's you stay within the argument. At the same time, the kind of arguments that you get in boldface questions are essentially much more sophisticated than what you get in assumption, strength, and weaker and evaluate questions. And then you're really required to dissect those arguments. So if you do boldface well, if you're able to understand the arguments in boldface questions, you're going to have a much easier time tackling pretty much any aspect of critical reasoning. So it's kind of the, you may call it, it's the basics of critical reasoning, but it's the basics in the most pure form that you're going to get, and it's the basics of argument more specifically in critical reasoning. So what you're going to do is, to get started, we're going to start with a question, not a super difficult question. Not a super easy question as well. It's a medium level question. I'm going to give you guys 3 minutes to get started with, to respond to this question, and then just put in your answer choices, and then let's go in from here and see how we approach these questions. So let's start with that. So here's the question. I'm going to share my entire screen, mute myself, and let's put those responses in. All right, guys, we now have about 40 more seconds. I just have 2 responses. Let's get a few more. Okay, last 15 seconds. Let's get a few more. Five, four, three, two, and one. So from the data that I have about five, sorry about that, five C's, one A, and one D. That's it. Did we get any more? No, we did not. Normally, for a question such as this one, I typically would get 35% as C. I'm just about 10,000 people respond to this question. About 30% as D, and then the rest 35% are typically split between A, B, and E. So E actually is the next most popular choice. Now, how many of you are 100% confident about this answer, about their answer? How many of you are 100% that the answer is C, no other answer choice is correct? All right. So the purpose of this question was to really understand how would we go about answering boldface questions. And at EGMAT, what we do with regards to answering boldface questions is we read the argument. In a boldface question, you always get an argument, and we read each statement in that argument, or more specifically, each clause in that argument. And we really classify that clause in one of two buckets. We really say, hey, does this clause belong to what I call as a fact bucket, or does that clause belong to a claim bucket? And we put them in one of these two buckets over here. Then we figure out what the main conclusion is, and then we say, what is it that each statement does with regards to the main conclusion? So how is this each statement related to the main conclusion? And over here, more specifically, what we are looking to do is, does it support? Does it refute? Or is it kind of something that provides context? And every statement has to do one of these three things. Then we really focus our energy on the bolded statements, and then we pre-think the role played by them. And typically the pre-thinking is of the form that state boldface 1 is a fact or a claim which supports, refutes, or provides context to the main conclusion, or it could be the main conclusion itself. So it's very, very simple, very standard form. Now, typically, you're not going to see answers in this standard form, but when you do the pre-thinking in this standard form, you're able to weed out incorrect answers, and you're able to really narrow your focus down to the correct answer. And then we go into option statement analysis. The Cosmic says, can all of this be done in 2.5 minutes? Actually, this can be done in about 2 minutes. One of the things that Cosmic, if you look at in the month of December, 60% of our success stories have been written by EG Matters, and you see them talking about how once you start following this process, your time to answer questions actually comes down. It takes time to really get there, and when I say it takes time, it takes about 10 hours of investment to get there. But once you really get it, you're going to find that that your time to answer question really comes down. In fact, if you go to our YouTube channel, you're going to see about 70 success stories. Each one of them would iterate a very similar sentiment. Okay, so let's kind of go through this. So here, what's going on is that actually, let me make sure that I can watch your comments on my main screen. So the first statement says stock prices of companies that exceed $100 billion in revenue, also called extremely large caps, really beat the market over a 5-year period. So what is this statement? We've got to put it in the fact or claim bucket. This is essentially a fact or an observation. The author is just saying, hey, there is these companies called extremely large caps, and the stock prices rarely beat the market over a 5-year period. Then the author says, it is commonly thought that this happens because the company is too big to grow than the overall market. Now, this is what I call is a compound statement where you have two clauses in there. Why? Because there's this part which is it is commonly thought, and then this happens because this part over here. And when you think about this, now this is not the part that is bolded, but I bolded it because I wanted to separate this part out. If you look at this entire statement in its entirety, and you were to classify this into fact versus claim, what you would really do, and I've already done that, I shouldn't have done this annotation. So if you look at this entire piece over here, and say, what is this? Is this a fact or is this a claim? You'd really call this overall statement a fact. And if you just focus on the bolded and the underlined portion, if you say, if the author were to ask you, what is this? This is a belief or a claim. You put this in the claim bucket. And this is a very sophisticated fact. Why? Because you have in a statement, the overall statement is a fact, but it has an embedded claim in it. Now, let's say, why do we call this a fact versus claim? What is a fact? A fact is something that is not questioned in the context of the argument. A claim or an opinion or a belief, all of them the same thing, we put them along in the same bucket, is something that a group thinks or a person thinks or even what the author thinks. And in just common language, we say when we say it's 15 degrees outside, it's a fact, it's a verifiable number, and so on and so forth. But when you say it's cold outside, it's an opinion in general. Why? Because a Finnish guy may have a very different opinion of what cold is versus someone who's from the south of India, where it's not very cold. Case in point, one of my friends that 15 years ago, when I worked for Nokia, went to Finland. Entered a cab. The cabbie said it's actually fairly good weather today. Turned the AC on, and that poor guy was freezing in the back of the cab. So again, and then again, so that's where an opinion is something what someone thinks. An opinion always refutable, always questionable. A fact irrefutable, not questionable in the context of the argument. So to go back to the prior statement, we said to say, hey, why is it that a certain statement which is a fact can have a claim in it, and how do we call it? Why do we call this entire thing a fact? Let's kind of look at this statement. According to Business Week, Wharton is better than Harvard. If you were to take the statement in its entirety, you would call it a fact. Why? Because what the statement is saying is, according to Business Week, Wharton is better than Harvard. And when you're taking the statement in its entirety, you're not going to question the according to Business Week part. Why? Because what the statement is saying is, hey, Business Week said Wharton is better than Harvard. And if the author is telling you Business Week said Wharton is better than Harvard, you're not going to say, no, Business Week did not say Wharton is better than Harvard. What you can truly question is whether Wharton is truly better than Harvard or not. You can say, hey, this is Business Week, you're saying this, but in my opinion, Wharton is not better than Harvard. Harvard is better than Wharton, or they both are equally good. Okay. So this is how you can have a fact which can have an embedded claim in there, and depending on what the question is asking, you'd call it a fact or a claim. So when you look at the second statement, and it says it is commonly thought that this happens because the company is too big to grow faster than the overall market, you're not going to dispute whether it's commonly thought. You can dispute whether this happens because the company is too big to grow faster than the overall market. So that's kind of a brief overview of fact versus claim. It kind of lays the foundation of what we're going to do in the rest of the session. So what's the overall statement? A fact, the underlying part, is a belief which is used to explain fact A. What is fact A? This piece over here which says ELCs are too big to grow, or ELCs rarely beat the market over a 5-year period. Okay. Then moving forward, however, studies show that ELCs that provide a higher return than the market over a 5-year period, a majority of them are run by their founders. Now, what do we see over here? We are seeing this one separate group of ELCs that provide a higher return than the market over a 5-year period. We're not talking about all the ELCs. We're talking about that select group of ELCs that provide a higher return than the market. And then there's a characteristic of that group, which is that a majority of them are run by their founders. So when you read this statement, you get two facts. One is that prior to reading the statement, you did not know that there is that group of ELCs that provide higher return than the market, and then you also figure out the characteristic of that. Now, one thing which is very clear from this is Boldface 1 is a fact. Boldface 1 is a fact. Then let's move forward. Then the author says, since most TLCs are under professional management, that is inherently risk averse. So this is a new piece of information, a factual piece of information that's given to you. Prior to this, again, we did not know that most TLCs are under professional management and that professional management is inherently risk averse. The study's findings strongly suggest that the real reason why most TLCs don't beat the market is not that they're too big to grow, but rather they're run by professional management that is too risk averse. So what is this? That's the main conclusion of the author. It's what the author believes in. The author is saying is that it's not that ELCs are too big to grow, but the reason why they don't beat the market is because they're run by this group called professional management, and that group is too risk averse. Okay. So let's kind of just do the structure of the argument. We now have put each one of them in the fact or claim bucket. Now let's kind of understand how are they linked to the main conclusion. Last statement, main conclusion over here. This part over here, since most TLCs are run by professional management that is inherently risk averse, that's written to make the main conclusion more believable. So it supports the main conclusion. Okay. This part over here, this is what information about ELCs that beat the market. Okay. So this statement is also written to make the conclusion more believable. Why? Because this is taken as evidence that ELCs can grow faster than the overall market. So it supports the author's conclusion. So Boldface 1 over here, what is Boldface 1? It's a fact that supports the author's conclusion. That's something which you already have over here. The first statement over here is essentially context fact. And then you know that there's a general belief about ELCs which is there in statement 2, and this is based on the information provided in this. And statement 2 over here overall is a fact, but the main clause here has a general belief about ELCs, and the author challenges that general belief. Now, one thing which is there is when you think about main conclusion, and I want to make sure you guys understand that in a CR argument, the main conclusion always belongs to the author. Okay, the author writes the main conclusion, it's what he believes in. So with that, we do our pre-thinking and we say Boldface 1 is, what is Boldface 1? It's a characteristic of the companies that buck the trend. It is a fact which is provided to support the author's conclusion. Boldface 2 is why that trend happened. It's a reason for the observed trend. It's also the main conclusion or the explanation that the author believes in. With this information, let's kind of go into the option statements and really say which one's the correct. Statement A says the first is a claim, which means Boldface 1 is a claim. Is that a claim as per our analysis? No, that part is not a claim. We already know that, so we actually reject Boldface 1 right away. We don't actually doubt the accuracy of it as well, but we don't even need to go there. Let's kind of look at choice E. Choice E actually is supposedly the closest choice. Choice E says the first provides evidence to refute what? An explanation that the argument favors. Can any one of you tell me what's another term for the explanation for this phrase, an explanation that that the argument favors? What's another term for this? Another term for an explanation that the argument favors is essentially a conclusion. No, an assumption is never stated, Cosmic. It's a conclusion that the argument favors. And if you think about this argument, there's only one conclusion that it favors, which is the main conclusion. Okay. It doesn't always mean the main conclusion as set. It means a conclusion that the argument favors. The only thing that happens to be is in this argument, there is just one conclusion that the author favors. Now, if it so happens, as you're going to see in the second or the third argument, where you'll have multiple conclusions over there, in that case, it could refer to any conclusion, not just the main conclusion. Okay, so choice he says the first provides evidence, and that part is okay. The first can provide evidence, a fact can provide evidence to refute the main conclusion, and that's where this goes wrong. We know that this doesn't refute the main conclusion, which makes choice E incorrect. Um, and let's just clear this out over here. Um, now let's go to choice D, D for delta. A few people chose D. D says the first is evidence that has been used to support what? An explanation that the argument challenges. So what it's saying is the key word over here is support, and let's see whether it supports what an explanation that the argument challenges. Can you tell me which explanation does the argument challenge? Which explanation does the argument challenge over here? Which explanation does the argument challenge? Too big to grow. Yes, perfect. This is the one that they challenge. Now, does the first support that explanation? Does it make that explanation more believable? Thank you, Asad and Ayam. Does it make that explanation more believable? Or does it go against that explanation? No, it doesn't make it more believable. It goes against that explanation. This part here is wrong, because of which choice D for delta is also wrong. Let's look at choice C, which is our correct answer, which says the first is evidence. What kind of evidence? That has been used to support something. What? An explanation that the argument favors, which we already know is the main conclusion. So the first is evidence. It definitely supports my main conclusion. So that's good. And what is second? The second is that explanation. The second indeed is the main conclusion. That part is true as well, which makes choice C my correct answer. So this is essentially a brief overview of how you go about answering boldface questions. Now let's kind of go into our next set of questions here. And so if you're an GMAT student, you should have gone through the premise and conclusion files, and you should have gone through the boldface files. That's the only prerequisite that we ask for this. A brief overview again. I think we've gone through this. You'll be given an argument. You'll have one or more segments highlighted, and you'll be asked to figure out what is the role played by the highlighted segments. You guys seem to be actually fairly well equipped around this, so I'm not going to focus a ton of stuff on it. So what are the key skills that we test in this? Okay, and because one of the things that we wanted to do was to really say, hey, when you make a mistake, you've got to figure out how to make a mistake. The arguments that you get here would be very complex. You saw one argument is equivalent to a difficult assumption question. The next set of arguments where the questions start to become more difficult would be even more complex. And so you'd really, these questions test your ability to understand each and every statement in that complex argument and the role played by it. The other piece is the option statements are not so simple either. An example of that would be an option statement like this. The first is evidence that forms the basis for a position that the argument seeks to establish. I mean, if you think about it, it's kind of three levels in there. Evidence, what kind of evidence? That forms the basis for a position. What kind of position? That the argument seeks to establish. So there's one level, two levels, and then the third level over here. Not a simple statement again. The second provides support for the position. What kind of position? That the argument seeks to establish. Again, you have two levels here. So it also tests these the second scale. If you're not an GMAT student, some of this foundation, you do get an introduction to assumption as you go through logical gap. Even though these are assumption related concepts, you understand how to read arguments, you understand how to figure out which statements support or refute the conclusion. So definitely go check them out. They are a part of your free trial. Just log into your GMAT account and look at it. You'll also get a few fresh practice questions with with a lot of with good explanations. Of course, you have about 20, 25 practice questions over here as well. So how do we go about answering Boldface questions? Again, we talked about this. We didn't understand the argument. We really figure out what its statement is, fact or claim, and how does it relate to the main conclusion. Pre-think the bolded statements, and we do option statement analysis. Now, let's now go to our second question. We have two more questions, three more questions for the day, most likely. Let's go through our second question and then see how we are all doing. I'm going to actually remove my screen. Mute myself. You guys have 3 minutes, so put in the option, select the correct option. All right, guys, another 15 seconds. This is a 700 level question, yes. All right, 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. Any last minute submissions? Okay, anyone wants to change their stand? Nobody. Okay, perfect. We have 4 C's. We have 4 C's and 1 B. Just 5 submissions so far. All right, so let's kind of look at this. This is going to be a bit more fun. So we're going to go through the same process. Detective from Rational Magazine, they published an article on the CEO of KNG. What is it? It's a fact. You're not going to question whether the detective published an article. Then let's go forward. What does the article state? The article states that the CEO is always seen using products made by a business and has never seen using any products made from another brand. What is it? It's another observation which is there in the article. The article makes an observation over here, and this bolded part is a fact or an observation. Again, you can really see more state terms which can be put in the same bucket. An observation is something that you see, not something which is mentioned, which is also a fact. You don't question observations in general. Then he says, since this report was published, the sales of KNG products have leaped high. What is this? This is another data point. It's another fact. And then the author is hinting that this is a result of the article. And then statement 4 says that people reason that if the extremely rich CEO who has a lot of choices is still using only KNG brand, then its product should be good. What is this? This is people's reasoning. It's a belief of people which is mentioned in this. Again, the entire statement is the fact, but this part over here is the belief or a claim that people make. Then statement 5 says such reasoning might well be flawed because what is this? This is the author's opinion. Then you have the last bolded statement. CEOs are loyal to their brand even if the products might not be top notch. What is this statement? This is also the author's opinion. Now, here's something which is very interesting in this. As you distill through this, you have 3 opinions in this argument. You have one opinion here, which is the belief of the people. You have one opinion here and one opinion here. Now, I'm going to go to the next slide. Can you guys tell me which statement out of this, and you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, which statement out of these 6 is the main conclusion of the argument? What is it that the author is trying to assert? Which statement is the main conclusion here? Which statement is the main conclusion? Well, 4 can't be, but this is an independent piece over here. So this can be the main conclusion over here. So inside 4, let's call it that way. Is it 5, 6, or the portion inside 4, the extremely rich CEO, the reasoning that people have? Okay, I have 2 6s, 2 5s, 3 5s. Good, you guys are right. The main conclusion is such reasoning might be flawed. This is what the author wants you to believe. Statement 6. What does the author give you statement 6? It is to make statement 5 more believable. And that's where I said, when you think about a CR boldface argument, what you're going to find is that it's much more complex. It has many more claims, and you've got to decide. You've got to have that precise understanding of the role played by each statement. So this statement is your main conclusion. This is what the author wants you to believe in, that such reasoning might well be flawed. And this is the explanation that the author provides to make that main conclusion more believable. Okay, so that's your main conclusion. The last piece is a supporting claim. It supports the main conclusion. Statement number 4 is something which is challenged by the main conclusion over here. Statement number 2 is is your Boldface one. It's a fact. It led to a particular reasoning by people, which again is challenged by your author. And again, what is statement number 3? It's a result of statement number 2, and it is explained by statement number 4 over here. Okay, everyone with me so far? Again, you need to have this level of understanding if you want to get to that 90th percentile in critical reasoning, or if you want to answer 700 level Boldface questions correctly. All right. So with that, I'm going to focus my energy on the options that you guys are interested in. Choice B for boy, is my correct answer. Why? Because the first describes evidence that has been taken as supporting a conclusion. Okay, you look at the word a conclusion here. Does the first support a conclusion? Yes. Which conclusion does it support? The conclusion that that if this extremely rich CEO has a lot of choices and it's still using the K&G brand, then the products must be good. So this is the people's belief. It's not the author's conclusion, it is a conclusion, and that's why the word "a" is extremely important here. And what is second? The second gives a reason for questioning that support. The second really says, hey, why the hell it doesn't prove anything? Why? Because the CEOs are only going to use their brand, they're loyal to their brands, even if the products are not top notch. This is your correct answer. Now let's see why choice C is incorrect. Okay, the first describes the evidence that has been you just supporting a conclusion, the same thing as choice B. The second states a contrary conclusion, which is also okay, it's a contrary claim, which that is the main conclusion of the argument. This is the part that is wrong. That is not the main conclusion of the argument. Okay, and that's really, really important to see. Choice D says the first describes evidence in support of the main conclusion. The first doesn't provide evidence in support of the main conclusion of the argument. So that part is wrong. The second states that conclusion is also wrong over here. So every aspect of choice D is wrong. And choice E says the first describes the circumstance that the argument as a whole seeks to explain or establish. No, the first does not. The purpose of the argument is to establish the main conclusion, which is that people's reasoning is flawed. It is not to explain why CEOs are using their products. And there's a very fine line between those. The author has written this argument to really say the way people are reasoning, that's a flawed reasoning, not to explain why the CEO is using that. Okay, so choice B, correct answer, only one person got it right, but 10%, 10 to 11% of the class got it right. Okay, now, when it comes to critical reasoning, there are certain 4 core skills that you'd see tested over here. The first is to classify a statement as whether in the fact or a claim bucket. If you make a mistake because you misclassified a statement, that's what you need to put in your error log. The second is to figure out how does that statement relate to the conclusion or the main point. In the current question, when people made a mistake over here, you couldn't classify which statement was the main conclusion. You were able to classify it as a conclusion, but you weren't able to really figure out which statement was the main conclusion. Your support or refute part, so far, you guys haven't made a mistake, at least those who've responded to. The third piece is, so this is supporting and relating to the conclusion or the main point of the argument. The third piece is relating both the statements, again, whether they're independent of one another, whether they support or they refute. And the last part is evaluating the answer choices. Again, I said the answer choices are complex. They have complicated relationships. Sometimes people don't navigate through the entire answer choice. They get into a hurry of marking the correct answer or marking a answer. Sometimes they don't even read through it, or sometimes they don't comprehend it. So again, if you did A, B, and 1, 2, and 3 correctly, you still faltered over here, that's the reason why you do it. And you've got to really note it down in your error log so that you can focus on this if that's where you're faltering. And if that's where you're faltering, you have a core skill that is missing that's going to hurt you, not just in boldface, not just in that particular question in boldface, but in many other questions in boldface, as well as in other questions which are related to arguments. Again, if you're an EGMAT student, where would you learn these things? Ability to classify a statement, the first thing you'd learn is in the premise and conclusion files, also in the boldface concept files, the multiple boldface concept files that we have. Um, whether a statement supports or refutes a particular the main point of the argument or the main conclusion, again in the premise and conclusion files, in the strength and weaken file, also in the assumption files. I mean, this is support or refute is a skill that you develop as you solve more argument based questions. As you go from assumption, tells you what supports an argument. As you go from there to weaken, it tells you what weakens an argument, and then you take all of that knowledge into boldface. Again, relating both the statements the same as where you learn this, but it's a different skill. But you learn as you go through those files, you learn the skill as well, and then evaluating the answer choices as well, which is where practically the only specific boldface skill comes in, and you learn this in our boldface application and practice files, in our Scholarinium questions, and the official guide solutions. Overall, you're looking at about 100 boldface questions all across over here, just boldface questions. Okay, now let's look at another question here. It's called Burton Tool Company. Again, you guys know the drill. I'm going to mute myself, and you guys have to select the correct answer. All right, guys, last 15 seconds, get those answers in. 5, 4, 3, 2. Any last minute submissions? All right, no last minute submissions. So, really good, interesting responses. We only have to worry about choices B or choice D. Why? Because we have 2 people who are here, we have 4 people over here. Okay, so it seems you guys actually understand pretty much most of it. If you're confused between choices B and D, the question really is which statement is the main conclusion and which statement is the intermediate conclusion. And now you kind of really see repeated patterns over here, which is actually we got 3 people in the B bucket over here. I think let's erase this. So 3 people here and 4 people there. So let's kind of look at this. Again, complex argument, many claims here. Okay. So a prominent investor, what kind of prominent investor who holds a large stake has made a claim that the company is mismanaged, citing, so this is a claim. Again, remember I said every clause can be a claim, citing as evidence the company's failure to slow production in response to the rise in inventory. Okay, so what do you see? Sorry about that. This is a claim and there's evidence which is linked to that claim. Then the author says, it is doubtful whether an investor sniping at management can ever be anything other than counterproductive. It's the author presents his opinion over here. But in this case, it is clearly not justified. The author also presents another opinion. So there's one opinion here, there's another opinion here, there's a third opinion here. Every statement till now has had an opinion in there. Okay. It is true that increased inventory of finished products often indicates that production is outstripping demand. The author states a principle or a general fact. But in Burton's case, it indicates no such thing. Okay, the author states another opinion. Then he says rather the increase in inventory is entirely attributable to products that have already been assigned to orders received from customers. There's another data point that the author really says. He says that, hey, the increase in inventory is there for people for products that are in response to the orders. It's not that production is outstripping demand. Okay, this fact is to support this part that it's no such thing. It also is to refute this general principle. And again, you only see this analysis and you really say, hey, do we need to do this analysis to get to the answer? In some cases, no, but when you're practicing, when you do this analysis, the level of understanding you get, the clarity of thought that you get is something that will help you get to that 90th percentile. Now, there's just one question here based on the responses. Is the part of the argument in statements 4, 5, and 6, is this written to make this more believable? So let's call this A and let's call this B. Okay, is B written to make A more believable, or is B the main point of the argument? So the question really is B written to make A more believable, or number 2, does the author want to prove B? What is it? B is written to make A more believable, right? B is written to make A more believable. So in this case, if the role of B is to make A more believable, then your main conclusion is this over here. Statement number 3. This is what the author wants to convey. In this case, this investor sniping is clearly not justified. And then everything that is over here is written to make his point. But this is his central point that he wants you to understand. Now, if that is the case, then I'm not going to go through all of this because I think you guys understand this. Your correct answer is choice B. The first states the conclusion, which is the main conclusion of the argument. The second states an intermediate conclusion, not the main conclusion, that supports that conclusion, which is the main conclusion of an argument. That's why choice B is your correct answer. 2 out of 6 people got this right. I'm not going to go through choice C. Choice D reverses this. The first states an intermediate conclusion. No, it's not an intermediate conclusion. It's a main conclusion that is drawn in order to support the conclusion of the argument as a whole. That part is wrong and that part is wrong as well. But again, it reverses all of it. So which is why choice B is incorrect. Okay. Now, I have about 6 more minutes. And you guys, I would say, were pretty good with regards to how you approach these questions. You got to the two answer choices. You faltered in that one area, which is how do you get to the main point of the argument? Identifying the main conclusion is where you faltered, which means when it comes to essentially understanding complex arguments, there's just a couple of areas where you're faltering, but you're doing well in most of the other areas, which means that you guys are kind of ahead of a few other folks in critical reasoning. Okay, we have about 5 minutes. Is there? I mean, I have another question here, but I think I'd rather, given where you guys are, address any questions that you have. The Cosmic says, can you explain the first claim or background? Okay, so Cosmic, can you be a bit more specific here with regards to your question? You want to understand what is a claim versus what is a background? If you can be a bit more specific, I'd be happy to address that. Meanwhile, if others have any other question, I'd be happy to address that as well. Oh, in this case, there's nothing which is there in the background. Let's kind of go through our argument structure. I think that's really good. So when you think about this over here, this is what I call as a very sophisticated argument with a lot of claims in there. A claim is something that let me actually go back to this view so that you guys can see this. A claim is something that that you can refute. A claim is something that someone thinks. Usually, when someone has an opinion or someone thinks something, you can always challenge that. Why? Because it's not a fact. Yes. Okay. I am and in this case, you can see a lot of the claims over here. The company is mismanaged as first claim. That's thought by the investors. This is an opinion which the author says over here. Can anything be counterproductive? Then this is the second opinion over here. So this is first, this is second. Then, but in this case, it's clearly not justified. This is the third opinion that's there in this argument itself. This is the principles. It's a fact. This is another opinion. Okay, and this is another opinion over here. Or you can the same deconstruction be used of every type of question in CR? So let me just look at the questions over here. Ayam says, according to GMAT, I always ask myself what's the most important point the author wants to address, and that will be the main conclusion. Yes, I am. Or what the author wants me to believe in as a part of this. What's the central purpose of the author? Why is the author making this argument? Because remember, an argument is always made with a purpose. The author wants you to believe something. So what is that one thing that the author wants me to believe? Everything else is gravy. in an argument. Um, Trigger words, Asim. The choice analysis is easy. No, I can't give you trigger words. I'll be very frank over here. In terms of, I can't give you tricks if that's what you're asking. But trigger words, I would say fact, claim. That's where you need to evaluate, support, refute. That's the other word. A conclusion, main conclusion, okay. Intermediate conclusion. That's a third piece. Those are, if you understand these things, and then you'll be able to tackle 80% of the questions over there. Asad says, can the same deconstruction be used for every question type in CR? Can it be used? Absolutely. But are you going to be able to use it in terms of normal CR arguments when it comes to evaluate questions, or are not as complex? Just if I were to really tell you from a statistical standpoint, and again the reason is because let's see if I can. So in this, we've seen three questions, three Boldface questions over here, and each of these questions you have either 5 or 6 statements. In a normal CR argument, you don't have more than 4 statements. 4 is the maximum number over here. A longer CR argument in which we have to look outside the argument is about 90 to 95 words, no more than that. And so you won't have like 4 claims in a normal CR argument. That's not normal for the other kinds of argument. It's normal for boldface. Why? Because you have to stay inside the argument itself. If you put 4 claims in a normal CR argument because each of the claims is doubtful, what would happen is that it'd be very easy for you to pre-think, because you can just break those claims and then get to the answer. There'll be just so many correct answers that making incorrect answer choices would start to become slightly more challenging. So there's a reason why those arguments are what I call as a lot more tight than these arguments over here. These are a lot longer because you only have to stay within the argument. So a boldface in some ways, in that way, it's a combination of what I would, not in the strictest sense, but an inference-like question type where you have to look within the argument, but it also has the argument part of it where you need to know what's the role played by each and every statement with regards to the main conclusion. How do you tackle evaluate questions? So Akansha had asked this question before. Akansha, evaluate is nothing but assumptions really a twin brother. So if you're able to figure out what the assumption is, evaluate is just rewording of the assumption in a different terminology 80 to 90% of the time. But if you want to be a bit more purist with regards to evaluating questions, we did do a session some time back. You can really watch that. In that we did a variance analysis, and we demonstrated how to really how to apply variance analysis beyond that. But if you know assumption, evaluate should be very, very, very easy. Assumption really builds the foundation for everything, and that's where in the course and also in the free trial, we tell you how do you pre-think for some argument for about 2 or 3 argument structures. In the entire course, we tell you how to pre-think for all the possible argument structures that you're going to get. The cosmic says, do you use short notes to capture the gist of sentences? When I need to, yes. One of the things that you guys have to understand is that the way you prepare has to change depending on the stage of learning that you guys are in. If you're someone who's starting, okay, to study and you're learning the foundation, we call it the 3 stages of learning. If you're learning concepts and methods, cementing methods, and then you're refining to perfection. These are the 3 stages. And when you're in the learning concepts and methods part, don't worry about timing. If your brain tells you that you need to write things down, don't bother about timing again. Write those things down. Your goal is to understand everything over there. And when you go through the course part of the GMAT portion, the first 70% of that course That is your learning concepts and methods. The second thing is cementing methods. When you go into the cementing methods piece, your brain, by virtue of having solved so many questions, will have automatically reached to that level of maturity that you won't need to capture every little detail, but you'll have to capture fewer details. Again, your brain will tell you that. Otherwise, you'll feel an overload. And at that point, start taking much fewer notes, and your time to answer questions will start to move towards that 2 minute mark. And as you get to achieving perfection or mastering, you're getting to that 90th percentile. That's when you're gonna find that the need to take notes reduces even further. But it still takes some notes. I mean, when I solve the most difficult of questions, uh, I still take notes. I take some notes. I don't have something after every statement. My notes are not that detailed, about a couple of words, and it doesn't slow me down. No, it won't slow you down. Why? Because when you take notes, you comprehend. When you comprehend, then you actually are able to get to the answer right away. Your time spent in getting to the right answer, selecting the correct answer choice goes down. So um, so yeah, hopefully, Cosmic, that answers your question. Adam, I am. Thank you for that. Please, those words of appreciation. Akansha says, how much time should one spend on a long RC passage? Um, it's a question that a lot of people ask. It's a very commonly asked question, and I will tell you that I hate to give a generic response. Why? Because each one of you is different, and if you read, if you watch the interviews on our platform, what you're going to find is that there are people who are really good in sentence correction, the people who are really good in critical reasoning, the people who are really good in reading comprehension, and people who are really good in sentence correction really say uh, that hey, I'm going to spend less time on sentence correction. That gives me more time on critical reasoning, the stuff that I'm not really good on, and that's how they maximize their score. People who are really good in critical reasoning, again, they leverage their strengths, and they actually spend more time on sentence correction. It says, I mean, it says there's each one of you is naturally good at something, is better at something or the other. Uh, and that's kind of where it depends on you. Having said that, I will tell you one thing. If you're reading things properly, a longer RC passage is usually a lot easier to answer than a shorter RC passage. When I was taking the test, when I would see a long RC, I'd say, man, that's good. Why? Because usually a long RC is not as dense. It has a lot of details, and if I read it properly, answering questions is this. A shorter RC, I read a lot more slowly, and because the language is usually dense, the relationship between statements um, is a lot more intertwined. In fact, just reading a statement allows me to draw a couple of inferences from it, and so the moment I see a short RC, I actually slow my reading down, just because I know it's going to be dense. Statistically, I've seen that. And yes, Trishak, you should read the RC completely before answering questions. Anyone who tells you otherwise is giving you an advice that doesn't work on the GMAT. A lot of people, your GMAT exam is supposed to be, the GMAT scores evidence, statistical evidence of how you're going to perform in business school. And excuse me. The GMAT exam is supposed to uh, test how you're going to do on the B school. And when you go to B school, you're not required to skim. When you go to B school, you're not required to look at splits. No, that's not what B school teaches you. They're not going to charge you $140,000 teaching you how to look at splits. No. So a lot of people who think that GMAT's a test of speed, GMAT's a test of looking at splits. No, it's not. It never was. And actually it has not been since GMAT took over the GMAT from ETS, which is the same organization that conducts the GRE. GMAT took over the reins of GMAT of the test from ETS sometime in 2006. And GMAT since then is a test of logic. Asim says, can we apply Boldface technique on RC? It's Asif. That's kind of like saying that uh, can I kill a fly using a knife? I didn't say a sword, but a knife. And yes, the answer is yes. But do you need to? Is that the most efficient way? The answer is no. Why? Because the Boldface analysis piece over here uh, is designed for the dense boldface passages that you get. Your RC passages are not as dense, and there's thank God for that. That they're not as dense. So if you apply it, you'd get a really good understanding of RC. And if you're struggling with it, maybe that's where you start with. But for me, it's an overkill, I would say. So and this is something that you realize when you're solving boldface questions. That focus is needs to be much more than when you're solving RC, just because the density of information, and I say information, not words, information is a lot more in NCR arguments than in RC passages. Cosmic says, how many questions can you leave or save time to score, say 720 or 730? I struggle with time on verbal. Cosmic, so it's a very open-ended question because I'm not sure what verbal score you're aiming for. So if you tell me what verbal score you're aiming for, let's say, let me make a guess. Let me take a guess here. Let's say you're aiming for a V40 in a Q50. In that case, I have seen people get a V40 with 10 mistakes. So you go, but they make those mistakes only on difficult questions. I took another session some time back, which was on how do you analyze your ESR. There, I actually dispel like a ton of myths that you have, which is around, hey, the first questions are more important. I actually show evidence of two different ESRs. One guy made more mistakes in the initial questions and made more mistakes overall. The other guy actually did the initial questions well. And the guy who made more mistakes in the initial question actually got a higher score. Actual GMAT ESRs. I mean, we've analyzed close to 5,000 ESRs. The kind of data that we collect, I think if you take all the other GMAT official GMAT prep companies out there combined, they probably don't collect the kind of data that we have. Trishak says, I failed on the GMAT twice. I haven't really scored well, failing to get even a 600. I'm really confused. What do you do? I would say, Trishak, schedule a consultation call with one of our student advisors, get a study plan, and so that's something that I would say. They'll help you do that. They'll help you decide how do you go. Okay. So that's something that you can do over here. Then I struggle with idiomatic SC questions. Any tips to tackle them? So Akansha, no one calls me sir, first of all. They call me Rajat, they call Pile. That's something that we prefer. Any tips to tackle idiomatic SC questions? First of all, there are very few idiomatic SC questions. If you're worried about them, then you're probably already at 90th percentile in SC. And just there are about 10 idioms that they test. Just learn them up. That's all I would say. If you have a list of 100 idioms, you're doing the wrong thing. How can you get a V40 if you have a V33? Figure out where you've where you're lacking. That's truly the thing. I'm gonna actually send some success stories for you people who've gone from a V33 to V40. Let me see if I can get that to you. So here's a guy who went from a V33 to a V40 in in about 3 weeks. So you can really see how he went there. The key over here is to focus on where you need help, and then why you're faltering. Once you do that, and in the same playlist, you're going to see many stories of people who've gotten there. Ayam says, when is private tutoring the best for you? Ayam, there are 2 or 3 scenarios in which private tutoring is the best for you. One is if you as a student cannot keep focus, and you know that, hey, when you work with a private tutor, uh, uh, you are going to have your focus and do that. And a classic case in point, I will tell you, and that's something, knowing yourself is really important. Um, so Payal and I work with a personal trainer when it comes to fitness. That's kind of equivalent of a private tutor. And the very simple reason why we do that, it's not that we can't make our own workouts. It's just that A, we don't have the time to make our own workouts. And B, we're just so engaged in the business, we know if someone's not coming on our head, I'm not going to do it. Okay, and that's the reason why we engage with the trainer. The third reason, which is a minor reason, which is there is, I want to push myself. At the same time, I don't want to hurt myself. So yes, a private tutor would or a personal trainer would ensure that I don't hurt myself. But again, if I go to the gym and if I focus on machines, I get the same output. But it's just that the time value is not there. So if you can push yourself to study, um, then you probably don't need a private tutor. With the GMAT course, you get probably 10 times as much feedback as a private tutor gives you. But you yourself have to discipline yourself. Or what the course won't do is it won't stop you from going to YouTube when you're studying. No, it won't do that. A private tutor will do that. So I am hopefully that helps you understand the private tutor piece. No, the Cosmic says, I have over 15 years of experience. Do you suggest going for an MBA? Would schools think that I have more experience than the average class? Yes, you do have more experience than the average class. But the big question for you, forget about what the schools think, is why is this the right time for you to do an MBA? What is an MBA going to give you? There are older students in B schools. I mean, a couple of years ago, I visited UCL Anderson. The oldest student in the full-time class of 2018 was 47 years old. I'm sure you're younger than that. We've had a lot of students who have 12 to 15 years of experience and they get into top schools, but each one of them has a good reason uh, as to why they want to get there. Okay, and so that's something which is really important. You want to see some examples? Here are some examples over here. Just if you Google MBA, if you go here and really just see, you'd be able to see some examples as well. Trishak says, why are my quant scores fluctuating by 10 points in quant? It's a different topic, but it would really help me. I got 46 in my first GMAT and 36 on my second. Again, Trishak, data will tell you. I don't have the data, but your ESRs will tell you. They'll give you at least, and ESR gives you about 6 to 7 data points to answer this question. The first data point that will tell you is arithmetic versus algebra geometry. Where did you falter more, or did you falter in both equally? That's one piece. That's I should use the scientific. I think that's much better. The second I will tell you is, did you falter all across in that particular subsection, or did you falter on PAS questions or just TS questions? The third thing it will tell you is whether timing had an impact uh, uh, on this with regards to, hey, we did you solve questions correctly when you took more time, and then towards the end did as a timing, as you did you run short of time or not? So it'll tell you that piece over there. It'll tell you what difficulty level you struggled with. It might not tell you in PS versus DS, but it'll tell you what difficulty level of questions did you struggle with, especially on the quant side where the difficulty levels are a lot more prominent. And then the last piece it will tell you is on what fine-grained levels did you make mistakes? Did you make mistakes on counting sets and other pieces? So ESR will tell you all of that. So yeah, get the ESR. Then UKB schools Akansha. I would say the climate is better for an MBA student. I mean, UK, regardless of what happens with Brexit, would always be a hub of financial activity. I don't expect the prominence of London as a city and in this entire London area to go down anytime soon in the next 20 years. And the nice thing about this is that you now get 2 years to find a job. So in my opinion, compared to last year, this year, or you're in a much better place when it comes to applying to the UK. Yes, Rishak, it's really hard to speak with me. For me, it's taking time out for these sessions is really hard given all the other things, all the products that we're developing to help you guys overall. The Cosmic says, are error log sheets different for each of the sections? They are. Why? Because the reason you make mistakes is different. So yes. Okay, guys, with that, I'd appreciate all of you joining me today. Thank you very much. It was a pleasure hosting this session for you. Thank you very much. Do take a look at the GMAT free trial. There's a ton of content over there. It will tell you how to think in a structured fashion. It will give you appropriate practice with good solutions, and you'd see an improvement in your score. And if you're stuck, you can definitely schedule a session with one of our mentors. Thank you very much, and wish you good luck. Bye-bye.